Hello. I apologize for the delay. I noticed that some of you weren't with me, but hopefully now you are.
Not working for me. That's good. There you go.
Okay. Well, you know what? Maybe I should stop and start again. That would be fun. I'm going to do that. I'll be right back. Or actually, are you guys there? Jenny, you seeing anything? Okay. I'm going to assume that you are. Sorry, guys. Give me one more second.
A massive delay, but it's working.
It is working? Oh, okay. Good. You're seeing me. Thank you. Sorry about that. Welcome to Sketchbook School. Welcome to another live drawing party. Eventually live. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm Danny Gregory, and it is Thursday, May 21st. And today we are going to draw and paint with ink. So if you have some India ink lying around in a bottle, get it out. If you have, a water brush or a watercolor brush, you can get that out too. And if you want to just draw with whatever comes to hand, you can draw that too. Painting with ink is an interesting medium. Normally we think of drawing with ink, but I like to paint with ink as well because it is an opportunity to play with tones and gradations. And the last couple times we've met, we've focused on cross-hatching because we're getting ready for Frans van Stone's workshop coming up on cross-hatch portraits. But today I decided, to hell with that. I'm going to focus on something completely else. Just because it's a medium that I like a lot. It is something. Let me just show you a few examples of stuff that I've done with it. So yeah, so you might have seen this picture before. I had it there at the beginning. And it is a combination of drawing with ink. Drawing, as you can see, there is hatching in there. Not cross-hatching, but actually just hatching. And there's also this layer of ink. And it kind of, in this case, is a little abstract with kind of blooms that are happening in the background, but you'll see that sort of thing almost in watercolors a lot. And here's another example. I like to do it also because when I'm using black and white photos for reference, it's an opportunity to kind of pay homage to that fact. Old sepia photos. Here's another example. So you can get kind of wet with it if you want to. These were all done in a moleskin watercolor sketchbook. The moleskin watercolor paper it's decent paper. It's fairly thin and it's not terribly textured. I think it's probably 150 pound. I'm sorry, is it 150 pound? Yeah, that's what it is. And then, here's another example. But you can see, if you squint your eyes and are generous, it has a certain photographic quality, black and white photos. And I also did a series of these things. I mentioned this before, these sort of self-portraits that were done in reflections that were kind of distorted. So I was drawing myself in a distorting surface, sometimes like a kettle or a metal mirror or just any kind of thing that is a reflection but is also distorting. And this is actually Sumi ink, not India ink. But again, you can see there's a little bit of cross-hatching going on. And then there's also, of course, the ink layers. So you get a warmth from Sumi ink that I think is really nice. And so there's that. Yeah. So that's what I thought we would focus on today, if you're game. So Thanks for joining me to do that. All right, cool. Let me see who else is out there. Hopefully you're all gathering your stuff together. And Marilyn has carbon ink. Yes, carbon ink will do. I think any ink will do. It doesn't have to be waterproof particularly. We don't have to worry about it really when it comes to this particular technique, because essentially what we're doing is we're mixing water with ink. We're diluting ink. So experts on art supplies might tell me that's not quite the way you should do it, particularly with India ink, but I don't know. That's the way I like to do it, and it works. So I do find that you have to think about what kind of paper you're going to use. If you use paper that's too thin, it will buckle, it will absorb too much water. So regular drawing paper isn't ideal. But I also find that if you use a really heavy textured watercolor paper, as I mentioned before, it's just hard to draw on. It's probably better to paint on, but you could also use a brush pen if you were willing to dip it into water. Because really what I'm interested in doing with this technique is getting gradations, getting things that are different shades of gray. Gradations, if you will. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So I have started this project because I was waiting for you. Yes, for once I thought, you know what, I'll prepare myself well in advance. And I spent a good hour kind of getting everything set up, which is, of course, why I'm late. Such is the way of things. But as I said, I started to work on this. And so I've done some of my drawing. So if you want to start finding a subject, I wanted to show you, here is going to be the guy who, oops, no, not him. Where is the guy? Ah, yes, here he is. This guy. This is the guy who I'm planning to draw today. If you look actually down in the notes for this video, there's a link to this particular fellow. He is, or was, a criminal in Arkansas. Well, I don't know if he was a criminal, but he was certainly arrested and photographed as if he was one in Arkansas. Probably quite some time ago, I would say. Looks like 20s, 30s, that era. Depression, the previous Depression. So, yes, you could use him. You don't have to. You can use anything you want. You don't even have to draw a person. You could actually do experimentation with just tones and stuff. Let's play around with that a bit. Here is my setup. So, let's just experiment. This will come into focus in a second. There we go. Hello. It doesn't like when there's only whiteness there. Okay. So the thing about this ink, and so I'm going to be using this, which is a water brush. And come on. Sorry, it just takes this camera a second to focus. So anyways, I'm using this thing, which is a water brush, which is just basically a relatively inexpensive brush. It's made of plastic. It has a hollow handle, and it is, a reasonable brush. And so what I'm going to do is I have a pot of ink over here, and I'm going to dip my brush in, and I'm using just a plate, ceramic plate, and it is, when this is just pure black, so it's relatively black. It's quite black here, and then when I squeeze the water brush, water comes out of the handle, and then I get a slightly different gradation, and I keep squeezing, and I get more and more. So, it allows you to have a range of different colors. And so now, when I go on my page, so that's not a lot of ink, right? That's mainly water. And now I can go back in and I can add a bit more water, and I can add a bit more water, and I get this gradation. So, I mean, I don't think this will be a huge revelation to you, but what's nice about it is it is kind of rough. I mean, you could do a very, very perfect gradation, but I don't think you need to. And you could practice with this. You know, it has a certain nice quality to it. You could just draw with your brush. But what I'm going to do is I did this drawing, I started doing this drawing earlier using my Micron 03, and that is what I'm going to work. See, it's another thing, as I mentioned about this paper you can sort of see, can you see a little bit of a dent there in it? So that happens when you use not great paper. This is not great paper. This is sort of, it's like bond paper, but it is, you know, it stands up reasonably well to moisture. So here's the guy that I started to draw before. There you can see him down there. So I started to do this drawing before. And hopefully my camera will cooperate with this. This is a newish camera that I just got. And it's a little temperamental right now. So it's not really, there we go. Okay, so you can see. So I've done basically just a contour drawing of this guy. He appealed to me this morning because I was struck by the, come on, there you go. Perfect. No, almost. I was struck by the bags under his eyes. And I woke up this morning feeling kind of baggy myself. I think I slept on my face or something. So, yeah, so he inspired me. He is my brother in luggage, face luggage. So, yes. So Cynthia says, I have a cheap plastic 6 or 8 well-D palette. One for black, one for brown, one for blue ink, and surprisingly the ink re-wets anytime later. Okay, that's great. I mean, I think having ink palettes is interesting. I play a little faster and looser, but Cynthia has, yeah. I have, those little plastic palettes are great. I have a lot of those back in New York, but here I have a plate, and that'll work fine. So a brush pen, Laurel asks, how about a brush pen touched with water? Yes, as an option. Yeah, as I said earlier, I think that's perfectly fine. If you're willing to dip your brush pen into water, you can do that. You know, I don't think it gives me quite the variation that I like. This allows me to have like a fair amount of control over what I'm doing. So yeah, so I'm going to start just kind of light, so that I have a place to go. You know, I think I've mentioned this to you before, that it's like you don't want to get too heavily into your dark areas too quickly because you can't back off that. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to just look at areas that are kind of darkish, but not super dark. You know, like the super dark areas of his face are obviously like his eyebrows. And, you know, here I'll color that in just for the sake of it. But I'm going to go back in and give him more as we progress. As we go along, I'll come back and give more in there. So. But you can see, so this is basically what I'm doing is I'm just using the same value over all this stuff. And it's a pretty kind of basic value. It's, I would call it a mid-tone. We'll see if it's a mid-tone. It's a mid-tone right now in my mind, but, you know, mid-tones get adjusted as you work and as you develop more stuff. So. You know, but again, when it comes to adding tone, if you're adding it like I am with a brush, if you're adding it with cross-hatching, if you're adding it with a series of different gray markers, let's say, you could be adding it with color. You know, it's depending, I mean, the medium, it doesn't matter really what the medium is when it comes to just thinking about what is dark, what is medium, what is light, you know? So, and you want to leave some room for highlights. So, you know, obviously his hair is mainly dark, but there are some light areas, so I want to make sure that I don't, you know, go too far there. As I said, you could be doing this same approach using any kind of medium. You could be doing it with colored pencils or just regular pencils too, and just saying, okay, this is going to be the darkest area, and then I'm going to come back in and just keep adjusting. That's really what you want to do, is to have room for adjustment. Okay, so now obviously he's looking a bit more three-dimensional than he was before. And by the way, notice I have my pen here at the ready, because I might decide that some of the shading that I want to add, the tone needs to come from line rather than just areas. Like the brush, you're adding areas of tone. Although you could, of course, also add lines. I mean, I could do lines like that as well with the brush. All right, so now what I did is just now I reloaded my brush with a bit more dark, because I'm now going to go into areas that I'm confident are going to be pretty dark, are going to be the most dark. So, you know, I can now start to just raise it. But again, my ink is always diluted. It's never a pure black that I'm working with, never pure India ink. There might come a time where I want to do that at the very end, you know, and really make things really dark. But at this point, I want to still have room to move. See there, I feel like I went too far. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to back off by squeezing a bit of water out of my pen, out of my brush, and just bringing this back a bit, diluting it a bit, because it just felt a little strong to me. See, again, here I went too far. Although this area is pretty dark, it looks kind of like he has some sort of a weird goatee, which is not what I intended. And now it's kind of getting away from me. So I also have another tool, which is my piece of paper towel, and I can pull things back with that. So when it dries, it'll hopefully get a little lighter too. So I'm less worried about that. Again, if this is a proper piece of watercolor paper, it would be easier to pull this off, to pull it out of the paper, but it's not really good paper, so I'm a little bit stuck there. This area that's just a bit too dark. But one of the things you can do is if you have an area that's too dark, you can start to adjust the darks in other parts of it. Because right now, it seems a little out of balance, but you can see it's already starting to recede a bit because I can bring up the dark areas of other parts of the page. See, the nice thing about working in just ink like this is it's pretty great when you are on location. So if you're doing some urban sketching, and another way of using a brush pen with this technique is you could just use the brush pen as a source of your ink, meaning that you never actually are drawing directly on your page with the brush pen, but you're using your water brush. You kind of basically are rubbing your water brush on your brush pen, and you're picking up ink from it, and then you're applying it to the paper. So that way you never end up with the full black of the brush pen. Or you could just, as I said, dip it in water. Again, it's just harder to control that. So you could just say, I'm going to use my brush pen as almost just a palette, or a way of loading up my brush pen, of my water brush. So when you do that, you go on location, you don't really need to take big messy bottles of ink. You can just pull out basically 2 brushes from your pocket and be ready to go and get all this range of tone just from those 2 things, the brush pen and the water brush. So now what I'm doing is I'm going back into those midtones, and I'm deciding which ones I want to darken up a bit more. So just to make it a bit more three-dimensional, and also to kind of focus your eye in certain areas. You know, by deciding what are the things that matter the most. You know, obviously his eyes are important. You can go crazy doing the hair and adding in all the different gradations in there. I'm not really going to bother because I don't really care about his hair that much. To me, the look of him seems to come from his eyes. And again, those delightful bags there. So I'm going to let this sit for a second. I'm just going to let it dry, and then I'm going to go back in with the my drawing pen, my Micron 03, because I feel like there are things I still want to sharpen up. So it's just this back and forth of just adjusting your tones back and forth, and then adding to your emphasis, and every so often, if you do go too far with something, then everything else needs to get adjusted too, to kind of pull it out. So let me see how you guys are doing. I hope that everybody eventually managed to get on. So Claire asked, do I do the first drawing with a dip pen or a fountain pen? I didn't do it with either. I did it with a Micron 03. I could have done it with a dip pen, but here's the thing is, if the ink wasn't fully dried, as it wouldn't have been. I mean, with a dip pen, you might have had some ink that in my line that wasn't fully dried, even though it seemed like it was. And then when I go over it with this water brush, it would have reanimated those lines, right? They would have suddenly started to flow out, and then that ink would have combined with the other ink. It would have just been messy. Similarly, with a fountain pen, of course, if you had non-waterproof ink, water-based ink, and then you start going over with the water brush, it's going to animate that. By animated, I mean you have a line that looks like it's dry, you put some water on it, and the ink becomes diluted and starts to flow. And, another option, as I mentioned with the brush pen, is if you drew it with a fountain pen with non-waterproof ink, water-based ink, in other words, you could use your brush, your water brush, to pull tone out of that. So you could do it that way. It would probably ruin your original lines, or at least soften them. So I wouldn't necessarily go in that direction. What else? Yes, okay, you guys had already answered your question, but hopefully I've added some more information to this. Yes, in fact, several of you who've come up with the same solution that I have. I'm sorry about whatever technical problems we have. It's frankly not me. It's YouTube for once. I don't really think I'm to blame, but who knows. What else? And does the ink dry a little lighter like watercolor does? Yes, it does. I think when we go back to it in a second, you'll see it doesn't look black like India ink. It looks like lots of soft tones. Yes. A lot of you seem to be answering questions better than I would in the chat, and that's great. What do you need me for? Cool. Let's see. Is it a small tip water brush you use? Honestly, this is part of the art supplies that my art fairy brought me. So it is not something I chose. So I don't even know really, but it seems to be sort of a medium-sized standard one. I mean, and it comes to a point as well. So that's also helpful when you're drawing lines and stuff. So that is good. What else? Is this another one of my famous criminals? Yes, it is. He's from Arkansas this time instead of Australia. And again, if you want the reference, you will find it in the notes below. If you want the photo, you want to go to it and download it yourself, I put a link in where you can get it, so you don't have to bother looking at it on the screen. Lenore says, my guy looks younger than Danny's because I didn't capture all the lines. I'm using a dip pen with waterproof ink, and I definitely, yes. So yeah, I think, Lenore, your problem is probably just that it isn't fully dried, could be how the paper absorbs the ink. If you were drawing with ink on watercolor paper, it could take quite a while. If there's a lot of, if there's, what is it, the word that I'm looking for? If there is it's not sealant, it's not medium. Well, there's a substance that they put on watercolor paper that stops watercolor from absorbing too quickly into the paper, and that can keep ink from drying properly too. Catherine seems to be doing it the opposite way. First she started with the ink washes, and then she drew the line on top. Well, that sounds familiar. That sounds like the technique that we learned last weekend in the workshop from Owen Marwin, which is first put down your tones, your watercolor, and then sharpen up with your line. What I'm doing is kind of a little bit of both, going back and forth, and that's nice. Barb is using blue fountain pen ink and sepia. That's a nice combination, and great, I think, for portraits also, because you'll probably get some nice sizing. Yes, thank you, Kathleen. The word was sizing. Thank you. Yeah, so with the blue and brown, you're probably get some nice color combinations. I'm trying to basically avoid color altogether here, so let's go back and have a look at Mr. Baggs here and see how he's doing. Come on, you can do it. Yes. So he is it's pretty dry now. So I'm going to go back in now, and I'm just going to give him some help and see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do basically a little cross hatching. I want to emphasize those bags. I also want to sort of put some more lines around his eyes. I could have done all this initially, but I sort of thought I might be able to get it all with the brush. But now I'm seeing like, well, it's not quite where I wanted it to be. So, there's no harm in going back in and just adding some more details with your brush later on. With your pen later on. So, and you can also add tone, of course, like that. You can add tone in with using hatching and cross hatching. What I think is interesting about this technique is it's essentially all ink, right? Everything you're doing is ink, and you're just using ink in lots of different ways. You're using ink as a painting medium. You're using it to draw lines. You're using it to add tone, and all those things are different ways of using the same medium. Similarly, you could do the same with watercolor. You could decide that you want to do a drawing in watercolor, and then you could add areas of flat wash and color. You could certainly do it with gouache. Gouache is really good for drawing harder lines, crisper lines than you would ever get with watercolor because of its opacity. So there are areas of this drawing that I would like to make very dark, but I'm a little worried about doing it with just pure India ink on the brush, because I feel if I did that, it might be just so dark and such a big overwhelming area. So when I go back in and I cross hatch, there's something about cross hatching that's more kind of intermediate than in value than kind of big brush strokes. Right? Brush strokes. If I did big brush strokes right now in black, it would just be really heavy-handed. So I've been thinking a lot about tone because of these conversations that I've been having with France about her workshop. She's just so great at this kind of back and forth give and take that you have to have, this constant adjustment. I've been with her when she's done drawings and you think, okay, that's definitely finished now. And then, no, she'll actually spend another half an hour on just adjusting, bringing up different tones, adding more areas. And what happens when you do that kind of work is the drawing ends up really popping. And you suddenly think, boy, I can't believe that I would have been satisfied with where she was at a much earlier stage. I've had that experience with my friend Tommy Kane as well. He'll do a drawing, and then only later on, after he's gone back in with colored pencil layers, with watercolor layers, with more layers of cross-hatching, does the whole thing really stand out from the page. And it just goes from being anemic to being really bold and rich. And the more work that you're putting into all these different areas, the more there is for your eye to look at, the more interesting that drawing becomes. And, it may or may not make for a better likeness. That's less the objective. It's more really just to give you more stuff to look at. And frankly, it's also more fun. If you have a drawing that's working pretty well, you want to keep working on it. Of course, you have to be careful. You don't want to overwork it. And if you do overwork it, that becomes another problem that you might need to, again, go back and adjust it. So if you have one area that now suddenly is starting to feel kind of muddy or, just has too many lines in it, then you can go back and, you might have to pull up other areas and make them as complex so that one area doesn't stand out so much, Got to be careful around the eyes because it'd be really easy to screw them up. All right, I'm going to stop there now. I think I'm pretty happy with this. It helps to stand back. When you stand back and look at it from afar, you start to get a sense of the balance and see like what needs adjustment. Yeah. Okay, I think that's pretty good. It was fun too. It was fun. Yes. Greta says squinting can help you to see the really dark and light areas. It's true. When you squint and you're basically lowering the resolution almost of what you're seeing, you start to see like, okay, there need to be some more midtones, you know. All right. I need a cure for tone blindness, says Chris. It's a funny idea. If you saw the whole world in like just high contrast, just two shades, black and white, I can't see anything in between. Could happen. Yes. All right. Frank Cho is another amazing crosshatcher. That's interesting. I'm not familiar with him. Frank Cho. I have to check him out. Frank Cho. Let's see. Lydia is using Sumi ink. Yeah, Sumi ink is cool because it comes, you know, it comes in really interesting forms. You know, one form is just kind of usually a green bottle, kind of big with a black top, roundish. But I also like it that it comes in these beautiful sticks. It's basically dried ink, and it comes in a stick that looks, at first you think it's almost like a big flat crayon or something, black, and often it'll have gold illustrations on it, dragons and all kinds of Chinese lettering and writing on it. And what you do is I used to have this, it's a stone palette. It's a round palette that's stone, and you take your stick of Sumi ink and you rub it in this palette, and as you rub it, it wears off some of the ink onto your palette. So that's another cool portable medium because you don't even actually need the palette. I've rubbed it on the sidewalk when I'm urban sketching. I've just taken it and rubbed my water pen on the top of it. But basically, you're carrying around a block of solid ink that doesn't spill, doesn't get on your clothes, and you know, it's lighter than India ink. It's softer. I would say browner sometimes. But you can layer it and layer it and layer it. You can put down a layer, put on another layer, and when you put the subsequent layers, a lot of times it won't reanimate the lower levels layers, so you're getting these nice washes that are kind of glazed over each other. It's really nice. So, what else? How come you never do female mugshots? I do female mugshots. It's more problematic. I don't know. I find it these women with hard-bitten faces, you kind of want to get into the details of their wrinkles and their shading, and eventually it's just really unattractive. I don't know, I just don't enjoy doing it as much, but I do it sometimes. I mean, I like to draw women's faces as much as men's, but I think the most interesting faces, and several of my friends agree with this, is hair, faces with hair, beards, mustaches. France draws a lot of those. Roz draws a lot of those. We can really get into the tangle of the hair and the stuff. So I think that's kind of cool. Yeah. All right, good. Well, I think I'm caught up with your comments, am I? could I clarify where you can find this photo? Okay. Again, if you look on YouTube at the notes that sit right below this video, there are a series of URLs in there, one of which is a link to this photo. So, yes, they sometimes have cool hats. That's true. That is true. I have particularly those old mugshots from the 30s and 40s, Australian ones. They're interesting too. All right. Good. Well, thank you all for joining me today. Today was very much of a sort of demonstration, educational focus. I don't know. I was just in that mood today. Didn't feel like talking about much else besides this act of drawing and painting. It was really fun. If you're interested in doing portraits, sign up for France's workshop. We're trying out a few new techniques in it that I think will be really interesting to really make sure we understand exactly what she's doing. And also, you can sign up at sketchbookschool.com/workshops to learn more about toning. I mean, I think the things that you'll learn from her go far beyond what I have to talk about. What else? I would also say you might want to sign up for my list, but I've given you links to that before, and I will give it to you below. All right. Well, thanks very much for doing this with me today. I will be back on Tuesday with another exciting drawing adventure to take you on. And in the meantime, if you would like to share what you've done, please do so. Just put it on any social media platform and tag it SBS Drawing Party. SBS Drawing Party. And then we can find it. That would be nice. I'd like to see what you're doing. What else? That's more or less. If you look below, you'll see a whole bunch of connections to other interesting things. But it was fun to draw with you today, and I'll see you again next week at another party. We party here twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon Eastern Standard Time. See you then.